So a very common question I get asked oftentimes is, does CrossFit cause injuries in people, or more injuries in people than other forms of exercises or other forms of group classes? I think it's a very fair question because CrossFit in the last, let's argue, 10 years has been one of the hottest forms of exercising that people have been getting into. Getting to the point where CrossFit games started being played on ESPN, which I think is wild, right? But I think it's a very fair question because a lot more people are doing it. You've seen a lot more CrossFit gyms opening up. Does CrossFit cause more injuries? So here's my 2 cents on that whole thing. For the most part, I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say CrossFit does not cause more injuries than other forms of working out, and I'll explain this a little bit more. All right. So in terms of history, from my recollection of watching CrossFit and looking at their website, back in the day, CrossFit tended to go as harder, heavier, as fast as you can, right? And smart gym owners started getting to the point where like, hey, that is actually causing more injuries into our athletes. So let's go ahead and be a little smarter about our programming. So hopefully nowadays, if you see any gyms or go to any gyms in 2019, that now you have smarter coaches doing smarter programming to be able to minimize injuries and hopefully get better results long term. But what I'm going to argue is that CrossFit itself doesn't really cause injuries more on people, because to me the people that tend to get more injured more often are going to be people probably that are starting a workout program when they were maybe very inactive, and or people that are trying to push themselves way too hard, even if maybe a good programming coach is trying to have them taper off. So there was at one point, I used to treat patients out of a CrossFit gym a couple years ago. And the things I would see oftentimes are people that are trying to change their lives, especially in January, February, right after the New Year's, and they're trying to lose weight, they're trying to be fitter. So they'll push themselves to the extreme, right? Not really ever listening to their body. So I'll say that if you're someone who's starting an exercise program, whichever one it is, you're trying to push yourself to the extreme, but you've been relatively dormant your entire life, you've already increased your chances of injury. Also, times I've saw many athletes being told by their coaches to lighten up, modify their exercises, don't go as deep, right? Take longer rests, right? But the person working out oftentimes wants to push themselves, so they'll go ahead, get to the point where they get themselves so fatigued oftentimes, or they work out too many times per week. That also increases your chances of injury. So I'm not going to tell you that CrossFit specifically gives you more injuries, right? But if you're willing to push yourself a little too far before what your body can handle, that's going to be increasing your chances of issues, right? But one thing I will say though is that most people's bodies cannot tolerate a lot of the movements required by CrossFit, especially a lot of the Olympic weightlifting. So I would say one of the things that is very difficult to do if you've never done it before is to do a very good overhead squat. The amount of flexibility and muscle memory you need, it's a very difficult movement. So I can't expect someone who can't do it with a stick to just do it with a bunch of weight over their head. And there's a lot of people that don't even know squat. They can't squat to the depth that you need to be able to do repeatedly that some workout the day or WODs might require you to do, right? I would say that we don't spend our time with our arms overhead throughout the day, right? So now I can't expect you to either do overhead squat or maybe a 50 pull-ups, kipping, right? That requires a lot of arm flexibility that we never do. Now you might be able to say, well, what if you're someone who just goes to CrossFit very often? Great. But what I said was I don't think a lot of people spend a lot of time in either the deep squat or arms overhead. Now, if I expect you to do that, let's say 4 hours, four workout sessions per week, that's 4 hours over a 7-day span. That's still a small percentage of the amount of time you're spending with your arms overhead or in that deep squat. So what I would say is that as long as someone is gradually improving, increasing their demands within their body, and they're good with their flexibility in the beginning, and really good about learning the form, especially in the weightlifting component or the Olympic weightlifting component, I think you've really significantly decreased your chances of having injuries from CrossFit. But if you're someone who's going to be pushing yourself way too hard, way too fast, not take care of your body or not listening to your body, chances are you're going to be ending up in our office. All right, thanks guys.